Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator, and I'm very excited today because I have a guest who we scheduled this interview back in November. So thank you for reminding me about it. Inspiring Philosophy. So your channel is almost to about 300K subs, which is fantastic. Congratulations on that. So, like, how did you get started doing YouTube, and how has that sort of journey been for you?
Oh, it's been a dumpster fire on a roller coaster in a rainstorm kind of thing, I'd say. It's been crazy. Started back in like 2011. My goal was to make about 13 or 14 videos and then shut up. But people kept asking me to do stuff, and then it just started to snowball. And here I am still making videos, and now it's my full-time gig.
That's awesome. So I had a few things I wanted to talk with you about. I guess if you don't mind, like I saw your debate with Kent Hoven, which is a while back, but I love that one. It's just very interesting because it's very different from the debates he usually does, because most of his debates are against atheists, because he makes this false dichotomy where it's like an us versus them thing, where he acts like the only people who accept evolution are atheists, and there's like one side which is evolutionist atheists, and then the other side is creationist Christians like him. And that's not true, obviously. So seeing him debate a Christian is really interesting.
Yeah, that debate I would call my penance. I did that debate as my penance because when I first became a Christian many years ago, I was sort of lured in by him for a while, and I was going on MySpace. So it tells you how many years ago it was.
Yeah.
Trying to defend his position, and it was just hard because his position is horrible and not easy to defend. So over time, I became a theistic evolutionist and decided, well, let's debate him. And yeah, it was interesting to say the least. He's kind of he is a crazy person, and it just
yeah.
He was woefully unprepared for my arguments because he doesn't do a lot of research. I mean, his PowerPoint slides never evolve. They just basically stay the same they have since the 90s. So he just was not aware of leading scholarship. He was not aware of even past scholarship, it seemed. It was really just interesting to see that he just wasn't aware of all of the scholarship around Genesis.
Yeah, and you mentioned James White during that debate, and they had a few years ago on YouTube, they had this really interesting back and forth that involved Gail Ripplinger too, who I sort of call the female Kent Hoven. I think she might even be crazier than he is. And
yes,
could you describe like what KJV onlyism is in your words, and like why it's bad?
Oh boy, yeah, that is Looneyville stuff. KJV onlyism is King James onlyism, so they only take the King James version of the Bible, and not even the New King James, only the King James. To their mind, that is the inspired word of God. And I've even seen people like Sam Gipp say that if you want the inspired word of God, don't go to the Greek manuscripts from, like the year 300 to 400. The King James is now the inspired word of God. So if you want it in Russian, you got to translate the King James. And so they literally think the only inspired word of God is the King James for some weird reason. And it's just like, it's because it was old to them. They grew up with it, and I guess they just assume. And the arguments they use to defend it are horrible. And so Gail Ripplinger wrote this book many, many years ago where she tried to argue against New Age Bible translations and just made up a bunch of nonsense, like trying to say that some of them were acronyms for like satanic messages. And James White, who is more conservative than I am, I mean, he's a young earther. He was basically has demolished her. But Ken Hoven basically picks up her stuff and runs wild with it. Ken Hoven will say nonsense like, we don't need gurus to tell us what's in the Bible. We can read it for ourselves. But then he'll turn around and say, we can't trust any of these new translations. Why? Because, well, the guru Gail Ripplinger said so. So why don't you just take her word for it? She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, and he said that, I don't have any financial interest in the KJV, even though he sells her ridiculously overpriced books, like authorized versions, and I think you mentioned another one. And she calls it like an ambush, like James White ambushed her on a radio show where they were talking about, like you mentioned, and she had this like acrostic algebra thing where she takes like the names of different Bible translations and like puts it into a math problem, and then the result is that it's sin, like that these modern Bible translations are sinful. It was just total nonsense, you know. And I love that that back and forth where Ken Hoven, he's such a coward because like he calls James White a liar, even though he never listened to the original radio show at all. He just assumes that what she says is true because it's Gail Ripplinger.
Yeah, and you get someone like Ken Hoven who probably read her book back in the 90s and then just started saying she's right, but he can't ever admit he's wrong on anything. That's one of Ken Hoven's, horrible personality traits. So he just defends it. And it's ridiculous because James White believes in the young earth. He would be a good ally for Ken Hoven, but Ken Hoven is about making enemies if you disagree with him on one little minute thing. So he's constantly pushing people away from him, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sometimes literally. So that's a good segue. So thank you for your interview you did with Cindy Lincoln. I really, I'm a friend of Cindy, and I was happy to see that because I feel like this is an issue where I made a meme about it, where there's like that screenshot from Predator where it's like Christians on one side, it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the other guy, it's like Christians and atheists, and then it's like criticizing Kent Hovind. This is something we can unite on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's a horrible human being, and at some point, you need to just put aside ideological similarities and go after just people who are actually abusing others. Like you could compare it to somebody like Andrew Tate, for example, who converted to Islam, and unfortunately, I see a lot of Muslims defending him, but still a lot attacking him. More reformed, progressive Muslims, which great. We can unite around the fact that that's a horrible human being. He probably should be in prison for pimping women out and controlling them and taking advantage of them and who knows what else. But I don't want to be the kind of person that just is like, well, Ken Hovind is a Christian, I can't attack him. And it's pretty clear in this case, the evidence is strongly against him. So I have no problem coming out and saying this is horrible, what he's done. He should repent of this kind of stuff. He should turn around and turn over a new leaf, so to speak. Same with someone like Steve Anderson. I mean, it's like, this is just a horrible human being who should not be on the pulpit yelling that, LGBTQ members should be executed. That's horrible, dude. What are you talking about?
Yeah, this is something that I've tried to expose on my channel, where I see Kent Hovind and then Matt Powell. Matt Powell is not currently at the Dino theme park anymore because he left for, reasons that I think are obvious, but, haven't been publicized. And Steven Anderson, like you said, talking about, Matt Powell said that he wants the government to execute drag queens by firing squad for reading stories to children at libraries. And I saw Kent Hovind did a video the other day, which I responded to, which is called "Is Evolution Dangerous?" And in there, of course, he makes a conflation with Darwin's book and evolution. And then he says that led to like the Nazis, which is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
and he's
ridiculous.
Talking about Hitler, and he said, like the Nazis, they wanted to execute these people and the like Jews, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets to homosexuals. I'm like, Ken, you think the same thing. You think the government should execute people who are gay. So how can you criticize anyone else for that?
Well, it's they want to execute his people. It's a superiority complex. It's okay when I'm in charge and want to execute the people I don't like. But if these other people get in charge and want to execute me and the people like me, well, that's dangerous. Ironically, it's kind of an evolutionary mentality. Eat or be eaten mentality. You get from like our primitive ancestors, kill or be killed, the tribalism kind of thing. That's what it's like. It's just a remnant of that, and it's not really like thinking broader than just I have to defend my own tribe.
Yeah. So from Brendan Condom, we have a super chat for $1.99. It says, "Just want to throw a little money at the channel." Well, thank you, thank you so much, Brandon, for that. So you mentioning evolution. So you are somebody who's argued in favor of theistic evolution. Do you get comments with pushback from from Christians or young earthers on your channel a lot? Is there?
No, never. They're so polite
Oh,
and
okay.
lovely, and they never attack me at all. They never call me the Antichrist or that I am working for NASA and the Illuminati. Like I'm getting a NASA paycheck, yeah, to put
False
YouTube
prophet.
videos up. Yeah, false prophet, because I've claimed to be a prophet, which is also like all sorts of stuff. And I just posted a comment that I got on YouTube. I posted it to Twitter. Someone commented on one of my Young Earth videos, and he said, "You know what? I think I can be a Christian again. My biggest hang up with Young Earth creationism." So here is something that they should like. My videos are bringing people back into Christianity, and some of the comments under this tweet I have are just like, "It's horrible. You can't be a Christian and believe anything other than Young Earth." It's like, for a lot of Young Earth creationists, I put them into two groups. You either have the Young Earth creationists that are just there and they don't care, and you have the Young Earth creationists that are militant. If you reject anything other, or if you hold to anything other than Young Earth, you're not really a Christian. You're like a lukewarm Christian that's trying to lure people away from it slowly. And it's like, for me as a Christian, it's like your focus is supposed to be on the Gospels and Jesus. Like that's the core of our faith. But you've made everything about your one obscure interpretation of Genesis, and that to me is more terrifying of a belief than what you're worried about, because you've lost the focus of what Christianity is about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we have a super chat from Colossia 789 for $5. It says, "Welcome, Michael."
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Colossia. So yeah, that seems sort of like what the first part of that Kent Hoven debate was about, was that, he was basically interrogating you about your faith. Like, do you really believe this? Do you believe this? Like, do you the Bible says this, do you believe that? Which he always does that. Like, he's constantly, no matter what he's debating, he wants to ask the other person what they believe and then tell them what they believe. And you were giving answers about the original text, and he was like very resistive to that, which.
Oh yeah, when I was featured on Whack an Atheist Wednesday once, he of course accused me of denying the resurrection and all sorts of other things, and I was like, "So you basically think I'm just an atheist in disguise?" I get it, and whatever, man. Like you're not interested in what the text has to say. You're interested in being right regardless.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, where does he think the KJV was translated from?
From divinely inspired men who knew exactly what they were talking. The funny thing is, if you read James White's book on the King James only controversy, he'll quote the King James translators, and they don't think they're doing anything special. They think they're just making another translation. They didn't think theirs was supposed to be the only ever translation available. And it was also criticized by people who had the Geneva Bible, saying that it was some New Age translation we got the Geneva Bible. Why do we need these New Age ones that have clearly distorted the word? Same thing that we see now with King James onlyists that happened back in the past with the King James. It's like, could do this again. Every generation, you got the old timers who don't want to change.
Well, I think it's interesting that Kent Hoven always says that, like, God promised he would preserve his word. He says, he puts attention on that he would preserve it, not that he would give us the word in whatever language he did, that he would preserve it, because for some reason it took till like the 1600s for us to get the right one. Why did it take so long?
Well, because the English language hadn't evolved yet, and so God was up in heaven waiting. Oh, I gotta wait for the perfect language to come along. English, perfect. Here we go. Now I can really give them what I mean. And I don't even hold to that, because I don't hold to like inerrancy. I think that God preserved the message, but like exact wording, we know that didn't happen. Just study the manuscripts. Like there's no reason to think exact wording was preserved.
Okay, we have a question. This is what's your thoughts on the dual author theory of Genesis? I think this is directed at you, because I have no idea personally.
So if my best guess is he's talking about the documentary hypothesis. So it's the belief that the Pentateuch was originally 4 separate sources called J, E, D, and P. So D is Deuteronomy, and then J, E, and P make up the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. And so the first, like, I think it's like 19 or 20 chapters of Genesis are supposed to be just J and P. So P stands for priestly source, J stands for the Yahweh source, E stands for the Elohim source. So that's generally what he thinks. And so This is what my take is, because he didn't say the documentary, but I'm guessing this is what he's going on here. So I don't hold to this. The documentary hypothesis, in my view, has really fallen out of favor in scholarship over the past couple decades. More scholars hold to something that would be like a supplementary hypothesis, fragmentary hypothesis. David Carr has got a great book on this that I read. And so I hold to more of a supplementary hypothesis, the idea that you have the Pentateuch and it was updated over time. So commentary was added. A good analogy you can see is the book of Jeremiah. If you look at Jeremiah in the Septuagint, it's 1/7 shorter than Jeremiah in the Masoretic text. And so when conservative Christians hear this, they lose their minds. But generally what most scholars think is that when Jeremiah was in Babylon, the book of Jeremiah, there was a scribe that updated it with some additional commentary. Fine. I think that's perfectly fine. So I have a series on my channel on the documentary hypothesis. I did it, started in just in August. I uploaded the first one, and I have 7 parts up of it already. So if you go to my channel, go to playlist, I put all 7 videos in there. And I think there's just too many problems with it. And I specifically even have a video on the flood account. Are there really 2 flood accounts in there merged together? I don't think so. Were there really 2 creation accounts, that Genesis 1 and 2 that were merged together? I don't think so. I think it makes far more sense that this is a priestly author. And you can see so many priestly themes throughout Genesis 2 that carry over from Genesis 1. And these actually even line up with the same narrative structure we find in a section of Leviticus. So it just seems there's so much unity there. It's hard for me to take that view. So I don't think that, what we have is exactly what Moses wrote word for word. I don't even think Moses is like the only author of that time. I would say that was just written by the collection of the elders at the beginning of the Iron Age, end of late Bronze Age kind of thing. And then that was slowly updated and supplemented over time. So that's generally my view when it comes to something like that.
Okay. Well said. So from Godless Scummer for £5, it says, I've been called an undercover Christian a few times. Feel your pain, IP.
What have you advocated for? Because one of my favorite atheists to read is Tim O'Neill, and he argues against Jesus mythicism, and he's been called a secret Christian for believing Jesus was an historical person.
Yeah, I am not a fan of that sort of whole thing, because I think it's just, if you are an atheist, I don't think there's any reason to think that Jesus wasn't also a historical figure. And, I have kind of it's like a half serious theory, but the idea that, maybe Jesus was a person who definitely existed, but perhaps he was like the original, like David Blaine, like he was like a magician who could, do these things that look like miracles to people and fool them. And perhaps he built up a following that way. I'm not saying that's what I think. It's just something I've thought about before. But
yeah, most
scholars,
most scholars think he did exist and that he did do something that people perceived as miracles. So you're on the right track there.
Okay. So we have another question. It says, what are IP's thoughts on honoring your father and mother if they think Christmas is pagan?
Well, you look, listen, there are exceptions to the rule here. Okay. No. Honor your father and mother by not being disrespectful. But you can politely disagree with your parents. Obviously, Christmas isn't pagan, but honoring does not mean you just fall in line and submit to whatever they tell you to think.
That's interesting, because that's definitely been the sort of common knowledge that people all think that it's pagan. So you say that it's not?
It is not. It's actually been something I've done numerous videos on. So I'll give you a brief elevator pitch here. People think the date comes from paganism, and we have no evidence of any pagan deity being celebrated on December 25th prior to Constantine. After Constantine, we see a bunch of references to a pagan holiday called Sol Invictus on December 25th, but 0 prior to Constantine. So what a lot of scholars think now is that because when Constantine came to power, we started celebrating Christian holidays, and the pagans got angry. So they placed a Sol festival on December 25th to compete with the Christians. Prior to that, Emperor Aurelian, for example, honored the sun with chariot races every 4 years in October. Saturnalia was on December 17th. And of course, Yule wasn't on December 25th until King Haakon the Good of Norway put it on December 25th to coincide with Christmas. So it just seems more likely that the Christians were doing their own calculations. And we see this in early Christian writings. They thought that Jesus had to die on the same day he was conceived. Probably not true, but that's what they thought. And they thought he died on March 25th. So just count forward 9 months, you get December 25th. So there's absolutely no evidence of any paganism in Christmas. Everything we see associated with Christmas comes from later European folk traditions or Christian customs that came out of Europe. There's just no evidence it goes back to paganism. But you're right, it is a popular myth today, but it's been debunked time and time again now.
Yeah, and even if even if whatever historical basis it has, it's obviously so different now that it's just a commercial holiday anyway. It's really just about buying stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it has become a holiday to honor the gods of capitalism.
Yeah. And, I'm an atheist and I celebrate it. I think most do because, it's just they're just common things that are easy to enjoy on it, like being with family and like exchanging gifts and stuff like that, that don't have to be tied to any religious tradition. But I think that is one way that Christianity is really sort of baked into the tradition of Americans and how we sort of see our own history, even though there's a lot of like Christian nationalists who think like, what do you think of these people who argue that we were founded as a Christian nation, or they say that there's like that the founding fathers like were Christians, or that they wrote some type of references to Christianity in the Declaration of Independence and stuff like that?
Well, I don't think we can say that Christianity didn't influence it, but it was clear that they wanted the federal government to be like a secular. So if you go back to the founding, Virginia could have a religious test for, you could only be this denomination if you wanted to serve in the government here. But the federal government was specifically designed to be secular in that it's not going to force any sort of religious beliefs. And that kind of stuff. Now, did Christianity influence some of their ideas? Sure, but so did Roman law, Greek philosophy. They're going to draw from their culture. They drew from John Locke, for example, who was influenced by Christianity. So I think Christianity did play an influence in the founding. And this is supported by scholarship. We see from scholars like Tom Holland, for example, Robert Woodbury as well, has actually ran a sociological model showing that out of Christian missionary activity did come ideas of democracy, colonial reform, idea of mass education for all people, this kinds of things. So he actually didn't just make an historical case. He actually ran a sociological model to demonstrate this. So when people say, is the U.S. a Christian nation? I would say, depends on what you mean. Are we specifically supposed to enforce like Christian teachings? No. The federal government is meant to be secular and stay out of that kind of stuff. It doesn't enforce any sort of religious beliefs. But do I think that some of the ideas that led to the U.S. government came from Christianity? Yes, but so did Cicero. Cicero was influential on the founding fathers. Greek philosophy was. John Locke was. I mean, I think there was one of those inputs as well.
Yeah. So I know those type of people. They cite the line from, I think, the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence that says that that people are created equal and they're endowed by their creator. But to me, I think that you can still have a secular reading of that, because if the keyword is there, a lot of people were immigrants to even the original colonies, and they're saying that they're created equal by their creator. So no matter who their creator was, they're not going to be treated or shouldn't be treated differently by the law, because you had people from different religious faiths, different even sects of Christianity that were coming into America. And you had problems like that. Like they had the Quakers, and they had, I think I forget the other sect, but they had laws against these people, and they were persecuted in the early colonies. And
Catholics were heavily persecuted at times. Yeah, I mean, it was unfortunate. Yeah, and that's just so they had to set up a secular government in the sense that we can't favor Episcopalian or Quaker or Catholic. Catholics, you can be fine in Maryland, do what you want to do there, but I mean, you can't enforce Catholicism from the federal government level.
Yeah, I think it was Quakers and Protestants. That's what I was thinking of. They like barely hated each other. So it's interesting because one of the things that Gail Ripplinger said is that she called Jehovah's Witnesses a cult, which I'm okay with that, but she also called Catholics a cult, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like you do realize, Protestants came from Catholicism. And one of the things I remind Protestants is like it was a Reformation. It was supposed to be temporary. In the initial goal of the Reformation was a temporary fix in the Catholic Church. The problem is the Catholic authorities didn't agree with the reformers, so there was a split. But ultimately, the goal of the Reformation was to reform Christianity, but not to divide. So, I mean, like my goal is what I'll tell people to piss off both Catholics and Protestants is that yes, the Reformation was necessary, but it should end eventually, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and Catholics make up a huge percentage of Christians. So I think,
They're the biggest church. To call them a cult is like you don't understand what a cult is.
yeah. And Aaron Ross said something interesting about this is that these same people who make this argument tend to be the people who really dislike Muslims. But if you want to argue that, because they'll say Catholics aren't Christians, even if it's implicitly, but if you want to make that argument, then you would have to also admit that that would make Muslims the highest religion by population on the earth. If you take away all the Catholics, then you become number two, which they wouldn't want to admit either. So it's an interesting sort of contradiction there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should bring that up sometime. I like the way you worded that. That was perfect. But yeah, they want to deny that Catholics are Christians, but then they also want to say they're a bigger religion than Islam. So that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah. So I saw in your new video, you were talking about like reasons why people might think that Jesus hasn't returned, or your argument for why. And I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Because the things that you said in there were definitely true, that if hypothetically, if you had that situation happen, if you had like Jesus return to earth, then you would have a lot of people who would want them to reaffirm that their own interpretation of Christianity was correct. And it would probably cause a ton more conflict than it would like peace on earth or anything like that. But there are some people who want to hasten like this end of the world, like via military conflict and all these things. And I don't really understand that,
Well, it's terrifying. And I'm actually a postmillennialist. Now, what I mean by that is I don't think there's going to be a future tribulation or rapture or antichrist. I think the goal of the Great Commission is to make the world a better place. So my belief is that the Great Commission over thousands and thousands of years will eventually be successful and turn the world into a new Eden. And so the goal of Christians today should be being better people and making the world a better place and trying to serve humanity and serve creation. Not like, let's get our charts on the wall and calculate when the rapture is going to happen, followed by the tribulation, and then trying to hasten it with getting excited when Israel goes into a conflict because that's apparently going to hasten it. And that's exactly the opposite of what Christ commanded before his ascension. He gave the Great Commission, don't calculate charts. So my belief is that, and I talk about it in that video a little bit, is that our job is to make the world a better place. It's not our job to wait and hunker down for the Antichrist and then Jesus will come back and fix all our problems. The goal of Christianity is to be the body of Christ, to make the world a better place that Jesus is trying to do through his people. But most don't get that, unfortunately. It's sad. So the point of that video was to try to get Christians to wake up to what they're doing, in that what they're doing is they're filling themselves with pride and hatred and tribalism, and they want Jesus to come down from the sky and kill all their atheists and enemies so they don't have to worry about him anymore. But that's not what Jesus taught. He said, love your enemies, pray for them, go out and serve them in whatever way you can. And that's going to change the world and make it a better place. This is what we as Christians need to be focusing on. So that was one of the main goals of that video.
Yeah. So I think that there's been sort of a dangerous attitude that some people have, like Ken Hoven always talks about how, well, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So it's all going to burn. So whatever happens on this planet doesn't really matter. And i.e., he also doesn't believe in climate change. So it goes to reason that we don't have to care about how we treat the environment, or even how we treat people on earth now. Whereas, as an atheist, I would say that this is the only life that we have. And it's, we need to take care of the environment for future generations. And we need to take care of the people that are with us now, because this is the only chance that we'll get.
Oh yeah, well, Romans 8 is talking about how creation has been groaning for the sons of God to be revealed, and it talks about how Paul also talks about how Jesus is coming to restore all things, not just save humanity. That Christianity is not supposed to be a rescue mission, get people out of heaven before it's get people out of the earth before it's destroyed. Christianity is supposed to be a restoration process of restoring the earth back to an Eden state. It's supposed to be this idea that we're supposed to make the world better. And I think I can argue from data like Robert Woodbury stuff, like I mentioned before, as well as Tom Hall and stuff, that there over 2,000 years, we do see some good effects that have come out of Christianity. But I think if Christians really focused on that as a whole, there would be a whole lot of great change over the next couple generations. And so I want to see Christians focus more on this idea of it's your job to make the world a better place. You're not here just to get out and use all the resources you can before the end. It's your job to leave the earth in a better state than when you were born.
Yeah. So what, I guess, I'm an atheist interviewing, somebody who's you're a very popular Christian creator. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. And you said that you talk about evidence on your channel. So what kind of reasons or arguments do you give when somebody asks you about evidence for God or your religious beliefs?
Well, I mean, I would first try to argue evidence for God's existence. So I can use things like the moral argument. I use an argument I call the emergent universe argument, relying on a lot of data we see from quantum field theory as well as cosmology, that at the most fundamental level, the universe doesn't seem to be reduced to any sort of material substance. And so then it becomes a question of what is the universe? So for those who don't know, I'm an idealist. I'm not a physicalist that I think all that exists is the physical. I'm not a substance dualist that I think there's mind and matter. I'm an idealist. I think all that exists is mind. So I make a case from an idealistic perspective that the universe itself reduces to more of like an information construct. And we see this in the work of Meinert Kuhlmann, for example, who is put forward ontic structural realism to explain some of the weird results we're getting from quantum field theory. And so he argues that everything sort of reduces to structures, information, mathematics. And so from there, I argue, okay, well, if the universe tends to reduce to information, we can make a case from there that the most likely explanation is that it would emerge from a mind. And so I did this in a video. I did this in two videos. One video is called The Emergent Universe, and another video is called Mind or Matter, which is fundamental. And so I kind of give a case in there that a lot of what we see with regards to advances studying psychology as well as neuroscience points to more of like a quantum mind aspect. And so what I'm trying to do is making a comparison there is that if the physical universe seems to reduce to information, it could emerge from mind. And now I understand I'm giving you sort of like the elevator pitch. There's a lot more I need to sort of expand upon to give that. And then I also say, well, understanding the mental world, understanding the way we experience the physical world, there's an analogy there. So the physical world can emerge from mind in this sort of way as well. So long story short, if you want to know how I actually explain that, because I don't think I did a very good job here, check out those two videos I mentioned.
Well, I'll put some links in the description of this video. So if you want to send me some links to videos you think people should watch, I'll definitely do that.
Sure.
Sorry, my allergies are killing me today. This seems kind of, I've heard some arguments sort of similar to this, but it seems like if I grant you that it gets you to a mind, do you think that there's still another jump you have to make to argue that this is your specific God, or
Yes.
is that within the argument? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, because you're just arguing natural theology is just arguing that there is a God behind the universe. This is like
Okay.
Richard Swinburne's strategy. So the next step is then, well, if is there a religion that's true? And then from there, I argue New Testament reliability. I argue the Gospels are reliable. That's actually a video I'm currently working on. And then I argue for the resurrection from the maximal facts case.
Well, about the resurrection, I've had some questions about that because I know like about the Bible somewhat, but I'm certainly no expert on it. But just from my perspective of the sort of common story of the resurrections, it seems like they put the corpse of Jesus in this cave and rolled a boulder over it. And then they came back 3 days later and the boulder has been moved and the corpse was gone. And then he said that he ascended to heaven. But couldn't somebody have just moved it? Like a
Yeah,
human?
it's a good question. Good question to bring up for sure. So it's not so much they said he ascended to heaven as they said he resurrected. So the Gospel of Mark says that he is risen, and he will appear to you in Galilee. And so the early creed in 1 Corinthians 15 says that he appeared to Peter and James and the disciples and to 500 at once, and last of all, he appeared to me. So it's then the ascension happens 40 days after that. So this is what Luke talks about in the book of Acts, is that after he had appeared to his disciples in his physical form, ate with them, spoke with them, then he ascended to heaven. So there's this space in between where there's a resurrection that happens. So the question then becomes, is it who stole the body? And that, or if it's someone that just stole the body. And it's an interesting thing to go into, because we start to wonder, well, who would have wanted to steal the body? Well, the Romans didn't. They didn't care about this Jewish peasant. The Jewish leaders would not have. The disciples, if they would have stole the body? The accounts are written in weird ways that doesn't really make us think that they would have been likely candidates. For one, they're constantly betrayed as not understanding what Jesus was talking about. They're afraid of the Romans. They're afraid of this Jewish Sanhedrin. This is why they abandoned Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, because they don't want to be crucified with him. And so they're going to go out and try to cause mischief during a Passover week. This is another fact that's often overlooked, is this is happening during Passover week, when the Jewish pilgrims would have flooded the city. And so you would have had people everywhere. So take, for example, we think Jesus praying alone in the Garden of Gethsemane all by himself. Probably not what happened. And this is Passover, right after the Passover meal, when it was typically custom for people to go out and sing hymns after Passover. The garden, as scholars like E. Randolph Richards points out, would have probably been flooded with pilgrims. Jesus probably would have been praying shoulder to shoulder with other people there. It's not this idea that he was alone in the garden. So this is also why Judas had to point him out with a kiss. There were so many people there that, he would have had to go through and actually find the guy they were looking for. So you have this idea of the body that's supposed to be in the Sanhedrin tomb area. It just seems very unlikely anybody would have wanted to steal the body. Anybody would have been able to steal the body without there being some sort of witnesses involved. So it's an historical conundrum, is what I would say.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like he's, pretty controversial guy. I mean, but again, I guess, maybe there'd be somebody who wants to steal the corpse to defile it or to display it somewhere. But were the reasons that they wanted to crucify Jesus was he declared that he was God? Is that why they crucified him, or is it something else?
Well, it depends on which group you're talking to. So the Jewish leaders, when he goes before him, Jesus says, are you the Son of God? He says, I am, and you shall see the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven. So that's a direct quote from Daniel 7, which talks about the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days and being given a kingdom that he shall inherit forever. He also says the Son of Man will ride on the clouds. Well, in the Old Testament, only the God of the Bible can ride the clouds. So this is a direct claim to divinity at the bare minimum. So the Sanhedrin, that would have been blasphemy for them, and that's why they tear their clothes. When they take him before Rome, they say they know that the Romans don't care if someone's claiming that they're a god, because they believed in multiple gods. So they bring up the charge that he is claiming to be a king, the Messiah, the one. So the Romans crucify him for being like an insurrectionist, claiming to be a king that can compete with Caesar.
Right, because if he says he's the King of Kings, that would put him above Caesar, right?
Oh, yeah. And that was a problem in Europe for the early Christians, is the first few centuries. They were told to sacrifice to Caesar, and the Christians said, we only have one king, and that's Jesus. Caesar is not king. And so they were martyred for that.
Yeah, and I think it mentions, like, in the Bible about taxes being paid to Caesar, something like that. Like, I think Ken Hoven ignores that verse, but
yeah. Yeah, and Tom Holland notes that is actually that I interviewed him on my channel back in February. He's an atheist as well, so he's a scholar who's written a really interesting book on Christianity. But he says this one line from Jesus, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render to God what is God," began like what he says. This is what him saying. He says this one line was one of the major things that led to separation of church and state. It was one of the earliest things that someone said that eventually led to this idea in Christendom that we need a separation of church and state. Religious affairs should not be involved in the government, and the government should not be telling religions what to do. Because in the Roman Empire, that was not the case at all.
Yeah, and you have Muslim countries that are effectively theocracies where the religion basically is the government, and you have Sharia law over there. And so I think it is wise to sort of separate those two things because, when you have one of the arguments that James White made against the KJV onlyism is that you can actually view it as a good thing that there's multiple versions of the Bible or multiple translations, because that means that there's no one ruler or oligarch who can say that this is the only version, this is from God, and then make changes to it that are going to be preserved in later translations, and have just one person be able to have the power to make changes like that would be bad. So if you have these different translations, they can be compared and contrasted. And I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think one of the things White also brings up is the fact that we have so many early New Testament manuscripts. So we have different families, like the Alexandrian versus the majority text. And we can compare these different families of manuscripts to find the textual variants and get back to what the originals most likely looked like. Islam has this problem because one of the early caliphates, they gathered up all the copies of the Quran and burned them and made a standard Quran for Muslims. So we don't know about what was going on. Like, why did he have to burn all these variant Quran readings? And so it's a weird thing to do. Christians didn't have the authority to do that or the power to do that. And they spread it around so much that we got so many New Testament manuscripts that came about as of today. And so, in my view, it's a good thing. I like the fact that there are so many New Testament manuscripts, because one thing, it shows us, A, it's not about exact wording, it's about preserving the message. And B, it shows us that we can actually figure out when the variants snuck in and get back to the original reading. And even Bart Ehrman admits, in Misquoting Jesus, none of the variants affect any essential Christian doctrines.
Yeah. So speaking of Islam, we talked about this debate you have coming up. So I want you to tell my audience about the debate and the topic that you're going to have at DebateCon, or not DebateCon, but just this other debate you told me about.
Oh yes, well, it'll be there. Can I share my screen here?
Sure. So it is at DebateCon.
It will be. Yeah, James.
Okay.
James Kuntz is hosting it. So let me. I'll show you what's going on here. So I'll give you the background. So there you go. Here's what happened. So many moons ago, well, a year ago, David Wood of Acts 17 Apologetics debated someone named Kenny Boomer on if Muhammad's marriage to Aisha was wrong. And for those who don't know, Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6 and consummated the marriage when she was 9, according to the hadiths, like Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, a lot of the earliest hadiths. It's not in the Quran, but it's in the hadiths. So Muslims vehemently defend this. Now, I tweeted the debate and said I was present for the debate, and honestly, I was quite flabbergasted and frustrated with hearing Kenny up there argue against this marriage. And so I tweeted it. And then a few months later, Daniel Hakikachu, the Muslim skeptic, tweeted this: "The Christian apologist inspiring philosophy insults the prophet and says he was sweating with anger. I challenge Michael to a debate. Child marriage, Christianity versus Islam. You want a chance to go after Islam? Here it is." So that's the debate. The debate title is, "Should child marriage be allowed? Christianity versus Islam." And I will be arguing it should not be allowed today and is morally evil. So, well, yeah.
I would have to agree with your position then. So
most people, I think, will.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this guy is going to give some very roundabout arguments that, because I can't imagine somebody wants to come out and just, argue passionately in favor of child marriages. So I would have to think that he's going to have some sort of sleight of hand here to make this case. But I'm very interested to see what this guy says, honestly. Now that you told me about
going
this.
to be a very interesting debate. I can assure you that. I need to start getting some stuff together, and I'll get my opening statement together and everything. But yeah, I started putting it together about a month ago, and I was responding to some Muslims on Instagram. And so, yeah, I should be prepared.
So that's one question. I think I'll ask this question too. Does IP believe in gay celibacy or conversion therapy? If the former, how does he justify God making gay people if he condemns the practice? Heavy questions, I know.
Yeah, it's a heavy question. I don't know if I have time to go into everything. I don't believe in conversion therapy. Let's get that off. Let's clear the bat off that. Okay. So gay celibacy, the idea that if you have attraction to men, should you engage in it? So here's my whole take on the whole thing is that I can't find a moral reason against two men who are monogamous and enter into a marriage. I can't find a moral reason. My take on it from reading the New Testament is that if you are a Christian and you enter into it, it's a covenantal sin. So you know how, like, for example, if you were under the Mosaic covenant, you couldn't eat bacon or pork or anything. It was a covenantal sin. It wasn't a moral sin. So generally, it's how I look at it in the new covenant, that in the new covenant, the only type of marriages that we are allowed to have are heterosexual ones that are monogamous. Polygamy is out of the question. Polygyny, any type, is out of the question. So the only type of marriages we are allowed to have are marriages that Paul lays out in Ephesians 5, where Christ and the bridegroom, so man and wife kind of thing. And so if we are in covenant with Christ, we are called to either be celibate. So even heterosexuals at a lot of times are called to be celibate. Christ talked about this, about how some become eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. Some are made eunuchs from birth kind of thing. But and so if you're going to be in covenant with Christ, the only type of marriages that we have are the heterosexual ones. And so that's generally my take on it. Now, there's a lot more I want to say on that. I need to do some more reading. I'm really behind on reading on that topic. But honestly, I'd like to be convinced I'm wrong on this, but I'm just not there yet. And I'm not sure if I will be. It's a heavily debated topic. I've talked to some people that do identify as Christian and are gay. And I admit they have given me some things I need to think about. But I need to work through that, and I need to figure out where I'm going to land on that.
Well, I appreciate you taking the question because I know it is a heavy topic. It's certainly a better answer than when I don't know if you're familiar with Jill or Jesus is Lord on YouTube.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I joined Praise I Am stream because they were talking about theology. And
well, as soon as you said that, I knew this was going to be a dumpster fire. But go on.
Well, he was pretty polite to me.
Good.
Praise was, good. He and I went on a stream before that, the week before or a few days before, where Kent Hoven was on, and a bunch of atheists came on and were debating Kent, which was a lot of fun. I have a video on my channel of that, and it was oh, it's a good time.
And also I want to say this: no one goes to hell for being gay. I think that if somebody is gay their whole life and they are a Christian, but they're convinced it's okay, that does not send them to hell. I don't think that the God just can't stand gay people. He doesn't want any in heaven. That's ridiculous. What sends you to hell is wanting to be your own Lord, wanting to be your own master, and not surrendering to Christ, accepting his free gift of atonement. So the only people on my view, I did a video called "Does God Send People to Hell?" And my view is God doesn't send anyone to hell. The doors of hell are locked from the inside. All that are in hell choose it. They stay there of their own accord. So being gay is not what sends you to hell. What sends you to hell is wanting to be your own Lord and Master. So I think they're perfectly compatible with this idea. It's like there are Christians today that are greedy. There are Christians today that look at porn. That's not going to send them to hell just because they continue to sin. So even if homosexuality is a sin, which I tend to lean in that direction, that doesn't mean they're condemned to hell.
What about people who are bisexual? Do they go to hell?
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm kidding. No.
I'm like, oh, damn it. Okay, well, that's bad news for me then. No, I was saying that I went on Praise's stream, and we were talking about sin, and Jill, sort of just brought up this topic where he was talking about former homosexuals, and I told him that there's no such thing. And then he started arguing in favor of conversion therapy. And he kept asking me this question of, well, there's been a 900% increase in children who are raised by gay parents who adopt them. They turn out to be gay. There's been a 900% increase. Can you explain why? And I asked him for a source on this, which I never got. But when I tried to give my answer, he would just overtalk me. And then this other person came in and he was literally doing the auctioneer voice thing to overtalk me. They do that.
Yeah,
it was ridiculous. So a better answer than they gave, although it's a very low bar. So thank you for being at least better than Jill on that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I guess we're about out of time. But what besides that debate, like, what do you have coming up for your channel, and just what's in the future for you? What are you working
So
on?
I'm going to upload a video on postmillennialism, as I was talking about earlier, the idea that the Great Commission is supposed to be about taking care of the world and bringing more people into the kingdom. So I'm going to make a case from the Bible and from history that postmillennialism is true. And I'm going to go through a bunch of studies that show how Christianity has increased education rates, hygiene habits, led to more democracy, colonial reform, political stability, citizen empowerment, education for even minorities around the world, kind of thing. And again, this is not coming from me. This will be coming from all the studies I cite. So I'm going to make a case for postmillennialism. Then I'll do a video debunking the rapture, which is utter nonsense. I'm going to do a video on time in the Bible and how time is actually different in the Bible. They didn't really, but in the Old Testament specifically, they didn't have a concept of a linear progression of time. It was more of like a cyclical model. So it was like a combination of linear cyclical change. So it was like this kind of thing is how they view time, whereas we view time in a linear type straight. So I have a little bit of scholarship. I'm working on that. I had a scholar named Satya Stern review the video, sign off on it, and which I was really happy about. Mark Chavalas also said it was good to go. Then I'm going to be doing some videos on the reliability of the Gospels. I'm going to start with Richard Burridge's work. I'm going to do some videos on reliable oral traditions, why it's very unlikely that between Jesus and the Gospels being written down, there would have been corruption. I'm planning a video on the psychology of memory as well. Could they have remembered things by the time the Gospels were written? So I've got a lot of stuff I'm planning on the reliability of the Gospels. Then hopefully around this time next year, I'm going to segue and go back and do the Israelite conquest. If that was evil, did God really command them to kill women and children? I don't think so. I think we're misunderstanding the ancient Near Eastern hyperbole. So a lot of stuff like that I'm surrounding with. But yeah, right now I'm focusing on is my debate with Daniel Hakikachu, which is less than a month away, on child marriage. So the good news is everyone watching this is probably going to be rooting for me.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can all agree on that, hopefully.
I hope so, yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael, and thank you to the people in the chat who sent super chats and people who hung out with us, even though it seems like my chat is a little bit disagreeing with you on a few things, but hey, that's fine.
Disagreement is welcome. I appreciate disagreement, and I try to learn from it as best I can, because I feel like we all need to submit our views to public discourse to get feedback, whether it's harsh or not, and then we can learn and grow from there.
Yeah, and on my channel, I've always tried to sort of have a community where I feel like it's open to people, whether they're atheist or religious or whatever denomination, just as long as people can be respectful. And I think it's important to build those bridges, because there's been a lot of disagreement in the past, a lot of toxicity on YouTube, especially like there is a few, I say there's a few eras of like atheist content on YouTube. Like you had about like 10 years ago or so, like Thunderfoot and Arn Ra, and like some of those early people, like I forget his name, but like Dark Matter 25, and what was that guy's name? This is gonna drive me nuts.
Dark Matter 25. Yeah, I know him.
Yeah. And then it sort of died down for a little while, and I feel like there's been a resurgence of newer content creators, and I think that some of those people, like I forget his name. I'm drawing a blank on everything today, but
there's a good people channel. I'll give you a good Myth Vision. I think he's great. He's very respectful and nice.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and Dark Matter's been making videos again, so it's good to build bridges between these communities, and so I'm glad that we did this. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it anytime. Appreciate it. Just schedule something out. I'm happy to do it.
Alrighty. Well, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.